Cool. So let's get started. Sorry for the delay. My name is Jeffrey. We're going to be talking about some commonly asked micro macro questions. Going to go over the answer choices, find the right one, and then also see if the answer that a previous tutor gave is actually correct. So with that being said, let's just jump right into that first question. The first question says, which of the following statements applies to a purely competitive producer? A, it will not advertise its product. B, in long run equilibrium, it will earn an economic profit. C, its product will have a brand name. Or D, its product is slightly different from those of its competitors. So again, we're talking about pure competition, and we know that there's three criteria that we use to judge pure competition by. The first is that there's a very large number, theoretically infinite number of producers in this market, which means that all firms are price takers. Two, that there's free entry and exit into a market, so there's no barriers to starting up in this market, and there's no barriers to leaving this market. And third is that all the goods that these producers produce will be homogeneous and identical, which means there's no ability to differentiate whether a good comes from one producer or another. And that's our three criteria for purely competitive, for pure competition, right? And so let's break this down into each answer choice and see which one is going to best match with those three criteria. So A says that it will not advertise its product. And this is definitely in fitting with our criteria. And the reason is that you only advertise if there's something that would potentially differentiate your product from another person's product, right? Like advertising is something that happens very commonly in monopolistic competition, where you have a large number of producers who produce slightly varied or slightly differentiated products. But in a market like with pure competition, where there's no ability to differentiate, there's really no incentive to advertise, especially since because all firms are price taker, there's no ability to make a positive economic profit in the long run, right? So A is going to be a really good answer here, but let's go down the line and continue with B, C, and D. B says that in long run equilibrium, it will earn an economic profit, and we just talked about this. In long run equilibrium, because firms are price takers, what that means is that a firm's market graph is going to look something like this, right? You're going to have a flat demand curve, which is the price set by the market, right? You have a supply curve, and so you can see here that there's no there's no ability for a producer to earn positive profits here, because it's simply producing as a price taker, and there's no additional profit to be made here. So this is what we would see as the long run equilibrium. C says its product will have a brand name, and again, this is when we see that people are going to be differentiating based off of some sort of character trait of their good, and that's going to happen mostly in monopolistic competition. Once again, not really pure competition. And finally, D, its product is slightly different from those of its competitors. Again, that's monopolistic competition, not pure competition. So A is still going to be the best answer here. I want to go with A. And so the previous tutor also picked A, and they said that in a purely competitive market, there are countless purchasers and vendors who produce standardized as well as indistinguishable products on account of which they have no influence over the price. They are additionally called price takers. As the organizations are delivering standardized as well as indistinguishable items, they have no rationale to advertise their items, as it won't influence their sales. The right answer is the first alternative, because it won't promote its product. So yeah, that's a good answer, and we're going to just mark that as correct. The next question says, with regard to the economy, the term negative inflation is synonymous with which of the following? Excuse me. A, recession. B, depression. C, deflation. Or D, hyperinflation. So let's first break this down into its elements. Inflation refers to when price levels in the economy are generally going up. And so when we have high inflation, we expect prices to go up by a lot. When we have low inflation, we expect prices to only go up by a little bit. And then we add negative, well, negative inflation would just flip that on its head. And so it's not that prices overall in the marketplace are going up, it's that prices are going down, right? And so what's another word for that? A says recession, and that's not going to be the case. A recession is what happens when you have a contractionary gap and you're on like the trough portion or the downward portion of the business cycle. That's not what we're talking about here. B says depression. Again, that refers to a very serious economic slowdown. That's not really what we're talking about here. C says deflation, and again, this is the term we use to describe when prices overall in the economy are decreasing. So it seems to be a pretty good answer. But 4, we can talk about D, hyperinflation, and that just refers to rampant runaway inflation, which is not the same thing as prices going down. So C is still going to be the best answer here. And let's take a look at the previous tutor's answers. So previous tutor said that, as we know, inflation is an economic indicator that shows the continuous increase in the prices of goods and services in the economy. A recession is a situation where the economy is facing lower economic growth, which slows productivity in case of recessions. If the lower economic growth is seen for a long period, then we call it depression. If the inflation rate facing an economy is very high, then it is known as hyperinflation. On the other side, deflation is the exact opposite to inflation because it is showing the continuous decline in the prices of goods and services in the economy. It is also sometimes known as negative inflation. Therefore, option C is the correct option. Yeah, nothing really to add there. We'll mark that as correct. The next question says, in a market system, the allocation of scarce goods involves the consideration of what? And so this goes back to one of the fundamental principles of economics, and that is that everything is scarce. There's nothing in the world that is not scarce, right? And so that scarcity forces us to make choices. And the thing we really pay attention to as choices is weighing the benefits of a choice versus the costs. And economics introduces this idea of not just accounting costs, which are the money that you pay, but also opportunity costs, which is the cost of the foregone alternative. And that's really important because that's the main distinguishing factor between decision making in economics and in other fields. And so what we're looking for here is that the allocation of scarce goods involves the consideration of opportunity costs. So let's take a look at the previous tutor's answer. In the previous tutor's answer, they said that in a market economy, the allocation of scarce goods involves the consideration of the opportunity costs of production associated with the given inputs of production. So I think they've taken a really producer-oriented approach, which is good. The producer is probably the one who's deciding what to do with the allocation of their scarce resources. And so in that sense, you would be saying, what are the things that I could build with these resources? And when I choose to build one thing, what am I giving up the opportunity to build in the same place? So opportunity cost is defined as an economic concept which describes the benefits of the entities, including individuals, investors, and businesses. Hence, it represents the value of the available alternatives over another. For instance, in a free market economy, the utility of different factors of production in producing a product has an opportunity cost of those resources. We can just add that the opportunity cost of those resources is the next best thing they could have been used to build instead of the primary product. That's just a quick clarification to give that example some more applicability, but there's no real correction to be made here other than that, so we're going to mark this as correct as well. Next question says, the market system does not produce public goods because A, there's no need or demand for such goods, B, private firms cannot stop consumers who are unwilling to pay for such goods from benefiting from them, C, public enterprises can produce such goods at lower costs than can private enterprises, or D, the production seriously distorts the distribution of income. So I think for understanding public goods, it's important to understand there are two facets that define the public goods case. The first criteria is this idea of non-excludability. And what non-excludability refers to is the idea that if this good is being produced, how capable are you of stopping others who have not paid for that good from using that good, right? And for many things that are non-excludable, the answer is basically no. You can't stop people from consuming this good even if you wanted to. And so a good example of the non-excludable nature might be a resource like fish in the sea, right? Where you're not really able to stop people from just going out and fishing in the sea. It's really hard to regulate that. Or another example might be national defense, right? You can't really stop somebody from being protected by national defense and enjoying the benefits of national defense if they live in the country, right? And so that's an example of a non-excludable good. And then you also have a what's the other one? Non-excludable and our non-rival. Rivalry refers to the idea that if one person consumes this good, does it impact the ability of other people to consume this good? And if the answer is that it's a non-rival good, then the answer to that question is yes. No. No. Non-rivalry means that one person's consumption of the good has no impact on another person's consumption of the good. You can think of this as a very lightly used highway. My ability to use that highway and my decision to drive onto that highway has no impact on someone else's ability to enjoy the benefits of that highway as well. And so that's an example of non-rivalry. And you put those two criteria together, and again, we have this idea of public goods being both non-rival and non-excludable. And so what we see in this question is asking, why does a market system not produce public goods? And most people would point specifically to a non-excludability aspect of public goods, because that's what really bars there from being any really private interest in producing these goods. People in the marketplace are motivated by profit. Producers need to be able to earn money on these goods in order to produce them. And so if in a specific market system, there's no ability to prevent people who have not paid for these goods from using these goods once they've been produced, there's really no capability to monetize the production of those public goods. And so private firms lack the incentive to engage in that kind of production, and that's why the government has to step in and provide those goods and call that a market failure. So going back down the list, which one of these answer choices seems to best fit our analysis of public goods? A says there's no need or demand for such goods. That's not true. I would say there's definitely a need for national defense. The market system doesn't provide it, but that's because that's why the government does, but it's still necessary and there is demand for such goods. B says private firms cannot stop consumers who are unwilling to pay for such goods from benefiting from them. This is true. This is really fitting with this idea of the non-excludability nature of public goods, so we're going to keep an eye on this one. C says that public enterprises can produce such goods at lower cost than can private enterprises, and that's not really the main thrust of why there's no private production of public goods, right? It's still answer choice B that really hits the nail on the head from that point of view. And finally, D, their production seriously distorts the distribution of income. And again, I'm not really sure where this notion comes from. I'm not sure what the link is between producing public goods and distribution of income. So B is still going to be the best answer here. Let's look at the previous tutor's answers. So the previous tutor says that in economics, public goods are those goods that have two main features of non-excludability and non-rivalry. Non-excludability is a feature which states that no one can exclude a person for consuming that good, even if they don't pay for that good, like roads, streetlights, etc. On the other side, non-rivalry is a feature which states that if a person consumes a particular good, then it does not reduce the amount of good for another person. The public good is not produced by the market system because of these two features, so we can say that option B is the correct option. And so I would push back a little bit on this, right? Because I don't believe non-rivalry inherently means that there's not going to be private production of a good. I can give an example, right? Well, first let's write this out. It's the non-excludability aspect of public goods in particular that eliminates the motivation of private parties to produce the good. A non-rivalrous but excludable good, for example, FM radio, or radio, like I think, is it FM radio? FM radio would, or let's just say cable or satellite TV would still be produced by private sector. So what I mean by the satellite TV example is that there's a class of goods that I believe are called club goods, and that's this non-rivalrous but excludable good nature. And so by the answer choice given by the previous tutor, we would expect that because non-rivalry exists in this good, we would also expect that this club goods would also be produced by the government, and that's not true, right? We see examples of non-rival but excludable goods all the time being produced by the private market. The classic examples like cable or satellite TV, where it's non-rival because for the most part, one person's consumption of satellite TV doesn't really prevent the neighbor or the next person over from also buying that subscription and getting access to that satellite TV, right? So it's non-rival, but it is excludable because you do pay a subscription model in order to get access to these goods. You have to pay a certain monthly fee for satellite TV, you have to pay a certain monthly fee for XM radio, and so that excludable nature allows the producer to monetize that good, right? They are able to say, if you don't pay, we can take it away. If you do pay, we'll give it to you. And so this is a good example of why it's really just a non-excludability aspect of public goods that make them produced by the public sector rather than the private sector. Warren Marcus is incorrect for the rationale, right? So just keep moving ahead. The next question says, a firm in a purely competitive industry has a typical cost structure. The normal rate of profit in the economy is 8%. This firm is earning $15 in every $150 invested by its founders. Instructions, enter your answer as whole numbers. A, what is its percentage rate of return? B, is the firm earning an economic profit? If so, how large and what percentage? C, what was industry C entry or exit? D, what will be the rate of return earned by firms in this industry once the industry reaches long-run equilibrium? So the first question part says, what is its percentage rate of return? Well, founders put in $150 into this into this business, and they expect for every $150 they put in, they will get $15 back. So the rate of return, the return is $15. The initial investment is $150. 15 divided by 150, you're gonna get 10%, right? So that's the answer to the first question, and the previous tutor agrees. Second, is this firm earning an economic profit? If so, how large and what percent? So we can compare the firm's earning a 10% returns on its investment to the normal rate of profit in this economy at 8%. And so we can say that they're clearly earning super normal profit levels, right? They've beaten the market rate of 8% and they've beaten it by 2%. So the economic profit they're making is, I guess, an extra 2%. I'm not sure exactly how the way the question is phrased, what kind of figure they're looking for, but they're making 10% and they've beaten the regular rate by 2%. So the previous tutor said, clearly the firm is earning economic profit in the short run compared to a normal profit 8%. The company is currently earning 11% of its. I think this is a typo. I think they mean 10% here. So we're earning economic profit of 2%. So we're going to correct that in the answer choices. We'll say the company is currently earning 10%. So they're beating the normal profit rate by 2%. Okay. C says, will this industry see entry or exit? And so what we're going to see in this industry is an entry, right? Other firms are going to look at this firm and say, hold on, they're able to make like every other industry is making 8%. In this industry, people are making 10%. Let's enter this industry, right? It's an opportunity to make super normal profits. And so you'll see more and more firms entering this industry. And what happens is that that's going to increase the supply of goods in this market and drive down the price that firms are able to demand. And overall, that's going to start lowering the rate of return as the revenue from each unit of goods sold in this industry goes down, right? But for the short term, at least, we see entry into the market for sure. And the previous tutor said, we will see other firms entering the market. The long-term rate of return is a normal profit of 8%. This industry will see some new entrants. This process will continue until the profit returns to 8%, any economic profit disappears. And this is true, right? As more firms enter the market, the rate of return is going to go down, and more firms will continue to enter the market until there's no more supernormal profit and you're at 8%. At that point in time, firms will stop entering the market because it's just like every other industry available. And finally, D, what will be the rate of return earned by firms in this industry once the industry reaches a long-run equilibrium? And again, we know that the normal rate of profits in this economy is 8%. In the long run, we would expect that after all the entrants into this market, that the normal rate of returns in this market would also be 8%. So the long-term rate of return is a normal profit of 8%. So great. So we've agreed on most part. I think there's a typo. We're going to mark this as incorrect, so this gets corrected. But other than that, that was a good answer. The next question says, to generate higher profit margins, producers must work to 1, decrease their production costs, 2, decrease their consumer base or customer base, 3, increase their total supply, or 4, increase their total expenses. And so let's quickly review. Profit is defined by revenue minus costs. So anything that would either increase revenues or decrease costs would be increasing the profit margin, right? So would number 1, decreasing production costs, would that increase higher profit margins? And the answer is yes. If you're lowering the cost that of producing a good, and at the same time you're increasing, you're maintaining your ability to sell that good at a constant price, then you're making more profit per unit of the good, right? So this is definitely going to be a really favorable answer for us. 2 says decrease their customer base. It doesn't really make sense why decreasing your customer base and losing purchases would generate higher profit margins. So that wouldn't really be the case. 3 says increase their total supply. Again, unclear why increasing your total supply would lead to a higher profit margin. If anything, increasing your total supply means you would be able to charge a lower price. And so in that sense, that would lower the profit margin. And finally, 4, increase total expenses. And again, if you're increasing total expenses, you're cutting into your profits, you're not making higher profits. So that's not going to be the case either. So 1 is going to be the best answer here. We can take a look at the previous tutor's answer. And the previous tutor says 1 as well. And he said the profit that a firm earns is the difference between the total revenue made and a total revenue in the total expenses incurred. The greater a difference, the greater the profits earned. Increasing total expenses would narrow down the gap, reducing profits for a firm. If supply is increased, the overwhelming quantity in the market will drive the price down, leading to a reduction in total revenue, right? We talked about this. A decrease in consumer base will shrink the profit, as plummeting sales will translate to plummeting revenue, or a reduction in revenue. And finally, hence, the only way in which firms can increase their profits is by working to decrease their production costs such that expenses are minimized. Okay, so it looks like that's in agreement with what we've said as well. The next question says, the non-discriminating pure monopolist must decrease price on all units of a production sold in order to sell more units. This explains why 1, there are barriers to entry in pure monopolies. 2, a monopoly has a perfectly elastic demand curve. 3, marginal revenue is less than average revenue. 4, total revenue are greater than total costs at the profit maximizing level of output. So let's quickly draw out the monopoly demand curve, or monopoly firms curve, so that we can see what this looks like. So unlike in the regular market, we've got 2 downward sloping curves here. We've got our demand curve and we have our marginal revenue curve. And the significance of this is really that the profit maximizing point is still, if we assume supply is equal to marginal cost, is still right here, and this is the profit maximizing point, but that's not where price goes. Price goes higher, and it's over here. And so this would be the equilibrium point for this monopoly graph. And we can see that in a perfectly competitive market with no monopoly, that this would be the equilibrium point. And so what's the reason that we see this discrepancy between what we see in perfect competition versus monopoly market structure? And the reason for that is simply because of this downward sloping marginal revenue curve that is more steeply sloped than the demand curve. That usually we would assume that demand is equal to marginal revenue in a perfectly competitive firm, but because it's a monopoly, we actually don't see that being the case. And the reason for this separation of these two curves is because in order for, as the problem stem explains, in order for a monopolist to produce more goods, to sell more goods, it has to decrease price on all units that it sells, not just the most recent unit, right? It's not able to completely price. It's a non-discriminating monopolist. It can't price discriminate. So if you used to sell a good for $10 and you sold one good, and then you want to sell two goods, and you have to decrease the price in order to do that, then you sell both of those goods at $9 now, right? So what's the marginal revenue there? Well, in the first case, you made you sold one unit for $10, so you made $10. In the second unit, you sold two units for $9 or $18. So selling the second unit added $8 to your revenue, and it didn't add $9, right? It didn't add the full price of one good. And that's because you lost the revenue you would have made for the previous good. And so that explains this downward sloping marginal revenue curve, which is more steep than the actual demand curve. So let's take a look at the answer choices and see which one of those fits our expectations here. And answer choice 3 says marginal revenue is less than average revenue, and so that's going to be the kind of explanation for why we see this being the case. And then the previous tutor says, since marginal revenue is the marginal increase in total revenue, if P decreases and Q increases, the change is small. Average revenue is always greater than marginal revenue since it is spread over all numbers of output. The marginal revenue and average revenue curves are always down sloping, showing that for greater output, the price needs to be decreased. The answer is this third option. The non-discriminating pure monopolist must decrease price on all units of products sold in order to sell more units. This explains why marginal revenue is less than average revenue, right? And so this is a good answer here. Next question says, producer surplus is the difference between producer surplus is the A, difference between the maximum price consumers are willing to pay and the minimum price producers are willing to accept. B, difference between producers' revenues and opportunity costs of production. C, opportunity costs of production. D, area under the supply curve. Or E, total amount paid for the good. So let's draw this out again. This is our demand, supply. This is our equilibrium. And what does producer surplus looks like? It's going to be this triangle right here. Right, the area between the price that consumers are paying and the price that producers are willing to accept, which is here if we assume that supply is equal to marginal cost, right? So right here. So this would be producer surplus, this would be producer surplus, this would be producer surplus. This is how much people are willing to pay. This is how much the minimum producers are willing to accept. So which one of these answer choices fits the best? And clearly answer choice A says the difference between the maximum price that the consumers are willing to pay and the minimum price that producers are willing to accept. That's going to give you those two, the region of producer surplus, right? So A is going to be the correct answer here. Next question, our next tutor says, the correct answer is A. A producer surplus is the difference between how much of a good the producer is willing to supply versus how much he receives in the trade. The difference or surplus amount is the benefit the producer receives for selling the good in the market. It is generated by market prices in excess of the lowest price producers would otherwise be willing to accept for their goods. Answers B, C, D, and E are incorrect because they do not address the price component of producer surplus. Good. Okay. This question says characteristics of competitive markets. The model of competitive markets relies on these three core assumptions. 1, there must be many buyers and sellers and a few players can't dominate the market. Okay. 2, firms must produce an identical product. Buyers must regard all sellers' products as equivalent. And 3, firms and resources must be fully mobile, allowing for free entry into and exit from the industry. The first two conditions imply that all consumers and firms are price takers, while the third is not necessary for price-taking behavior. Assume for this problem, a market cannot maintain competition in the long run without free entry. Identify whether or not each of the following scenarios describes a competitive market, along with the correct explanation of why or why not. So scenario 1. Dozens of companies produce plain white socks. Consumers regard plain white socks as identical and don't care who manufactures their socks. it seems to fulfill all the criteria pretty well. First criteria is that there are many producers, dozens would qualify as many. The second criteria is that all goods are identical, and consumers seem to treat plain white socks as completely identical and don't care who manufactures it. And finally, we're under assumption that there is free entry and exit into this market. So this first scenario seems to be a good match for our pure competition scenario. Second, in a major metropolitan area, one chain of coffee shops has gained a large market share because customers feel its coffee tastes better than that of its competitors. So it seems like this is a situation where you have a very dominant, almost monopoly. It's not a pure or complete monopoly, but you do have one chain which has a large market share and large presence. And so this violates that first tenet, which is that there's a large number of sellers, right? It's clear in this context there might be only one large chain and some other small ones. And the second thing we look at is the idea that there is differentiation between products, right? This chain of coffee has clearly differentiated itself because customers feel it has a better tasting coffee. So the coffee is not identical. People do care where they're buying coffee from, and that's why this is a violation as well. And finally, the third option is not really being considered. So this would not be a purely competitive market. Next question says, Scholastic Inc. owns the U.S. copyright to a popular book series. It is the only company with the legal right to publish these books in the series in the United States. And this seems to be a really big violation of criteria 1, which is saying that there are many producers of this book. Clearly, for this book in the United States, there's only one producer, so it's a monopoly. And second, there's not really much to talk about in terms of identical products because nobody else is producing this good in the first place, so it's not going to fulfill the criteria for competition. And finally, in a small town, there are 2 providers of broadband internet access, a cable company and the phone company. Internet access provided by both providers is of the same speed. So we do have identical products, right? The access to the internet is the same speed, but what we don't have is a wide variety of producers. We only have 2, right? And so they would be, this would violate that first criteria of having many sellers, and so this would not be pure competition. And finally, for broadband internet access, there requires a lot of hardware and a lot of infrastructure to support that. So I would also say that there is going to be high barriers to entry into this market in terms of that initial upfront investment into that infrastructure. So this is not going to be the case. Okay, so let's go down the line and compare it to the previous 2 answers. So the first case is the Sox case, and we said it was pure competition. And the previous tutor agrees, and they say this is a case of perfect competition because the products sold are identical. The second case was the coffee case, and they said no, because in this case one product is considered superior, so thus the coffee is not identical, and we agree there. 3 says there is only one firm that has a copyright, and we said that this is a monopoly, it's not a competitive market, and they agreed. And finally, 4, the internet access, they said yes, because the products are identical, the sellers are a small number, but it's nowhere mentioned that entry is restricted. So I would push back on this because I don't believe that identical products are going to be a really good justification for this classification. I would say this is not a competitive market. There's only 2 producers in this market, so it's an oligopoly, not purely competitive, although nothing is specifically mentioned to say that entry is restricted. We can infer that the high upfront infrastructure costs to set up for setting up broadband access would be a high barrier to entry into this market. So we push back on that question, but the other ones we are going to agree on, but we'll mark this as incorrect. The next question says, when firms have an incentive to exit a competitive market, their exit will A, drive down market prices, B, drive down profits of existing firms in the market, C, decrease the quantity of goods supplied in the market, or D, all the above are correct. We can test this really quickly in a market graph. So we have supply curve, demand curve. if some firm is leaving the market, what that means is that supply is shifting to the left by a certain degree. And what that means is that price goes up and quantity supplied goes down. So which one of these answer choices fits this prediction? A says that market prices will be driven down. We see that they would be driven up. B says that profits of existing firms will go down. It's unclear if that's going to happen. It doesn't seem to be the case that that would happen because the price is going up, so firms are actually earning more money per good. C says decrease the quantity of goods supplied in the market, and that is true, right? The quantity supplied in the market has definitely gone down, so C seems to be a good answer. D says all of the above, but we already said A and B are wrong, so C is a good answer for 11. Let's go to answer choice C, and they said C is correct. This is because when firms exit the industry, supply would reduce, and hence the quantity supplied to the market would fall. Okay, the next question says, in question 12, if a perfectly competitive firm currently produces where price is greater than marginal cost, then it A will increase its profits by producing more. B will increase its profits by producing less. C is making positive economic profits, or D is making negative economic profits. And so in this case, what we're dealing with is profit maximization. And we know for the perfectly competitive firm that profit is maximized where P is equal to MC, right? Price is equal to marginal cost. So if you're in a situation where price is greater than marginal cost, then you still have basically revenue that you could be making that you are not really making, you're not yet making, right? And so that would be inefficient. And so in order to increase profits, you would continue to produce more of the goods because you know that there's still positive marginal profit to be made at higher levels of production. And so that best matches with answer choice A, that if a perfectly competitive firm is currently producing where price is greater than marginal cost, it will increase its profits by producing more. And the previous tutor also said A, when P is greater than MC, it'll be profitable for firms to produce more because the revenue is more than the cost. Firms will produce until P is equal to MC. Great. 13. Does the consumer's well-being vary along a demand curve? A, yes. When price increases, consumers move to a lower indifference curve. B, yes. When price increases, consumers move to a higher indifference curve. C, no. When prices increases, when price increases, consumers stay on the same indifference curve. Or D, when price increases, the higher price has no effect on budget constraints or indifference curves. Or E, none of the above. And so what we refer to in all these questions talking about indifference curves is this idea that there are ways in which we can measure the utility of a person, and that their ability to their utility is constant along all points of indifference curve. And so a higher or lower indifference curve would mean that you're moving to a higher utility or lower utility. And so the real question here is, is utility going to change based on a price change? And the answer to that is yes, right? If a price goes up, people's real income goes down and they're going to be able to buy less of a good. And so consumers move to a lower indifference curve when that happens. And so answer choice A seems to be a really good answer for what we're looking for here. Yes, when price increases, consumers move to a lower indifference curve. And the previous tutor also picked A. When the price of a good increases, the purchasing power of consumer falls, leaving him on a lower indifference curve and making him worse off. Great. 14. If a competitive firm sets its output such that marginal revenue, marginal cost, and average total cost are equal, then economic profit must be A, negative, B, positive, C, 0, or D, indeterminate from the given information. So in this sense, if you're in a competitive firm and marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost equal to average total cost, then your economic profit must be 0, right? Economic profit is revenue minus cost. And so if your marginal revenue and total costs are equal, then your economic profit is just 0. It cancels out. So C seems to be the best answer here, and the previous tutor also said C. And economic profits are those which include not only the monetary costs but also the opportunity costs. Is the difference between a revenue and average total cost. And so in that sense, you would have 0 economic profit. And finally, 15, which of the following is a characteristic of a perfectly competitive market? A, firms are price setters. B, there are few sellers in the market. C, firms can exit and enter the market freely. Or D, all of the above are correct. We know that from the previous question that there are 3 criteria. The first is that number one, there are many firms and there are price takers. Number two, that firms are producing identical goods. Number three, that there are identical, there are easy or low barriers to entry and exit into the market. So C is going to be the right answer here. A and B are incorrect. So D would be incorrect. So C would be what we go with. And the previous tutor also said there are no barriers to entry or exit in the firm's imperfect competition. So great answers here. And we're going to mark this as correct. Next question says, a legal maximum on the price at which a good can be sold is called a price 1, floor, 2, ceiling, 3, subsidy, or 4, support. This is just a definition based question. And what we're really referring to here is the idea that there's going to be a legally imposed price control. And if it's saying how high a good can be going, we refer to that as a ceiling, right? If you're trying to go up, the ceiling prevents you from going any higher. So the ceiling is what we refer to as the price control in this situation. The next question, the previous tutor says ceiling as well, and they said the maximum price that a producer can charge for his or her good or service in the market is known as a price ceiling. A price ceiling sets a cap on the price level, henceforth preventing the latter from crossing a certain predetermined limit. A price ceiling is a regulatory instrument that is used by the government to protect or enhance consumers from exorbitant prices. The direct impact of a price ceiling is the creation of a shortage in the market, right? As a binding price ceiling, which is below the equilibrium, leads to a reduction in quantity supply while increasing the quantity demanded. So great answer. Mark that as correct. Next question says, which of the following statements most likely lies within the realm of microeconomics? A, unemployment rises during a recession and falls during an expansion. B, an increase in government spending will increase the aggregate demand for goods and services in the economy. C, a rapid acceleration of the supply of money may create inflation. Or D, an increase in labor costs will increase the additional cost of producing another bus. So we have both micro and macroeconomics, and they focus on two different things. Microeconomics focuses on the firm level or the individual level decision making, whereas the macroeconomics refers to the more macro or zoomed out level of country level or international trade level aspects of the economy. So let's break this down. So first, talking about unemployment during a recession and expansion, that's going to be on the macro level. That's talking about the overall economy. B says an increase in government spending, increasing demand for goods and services. Again, aggregate spending means spending in the entire country. Again, a very macro concept. C says a rapid acceleration of the supply of money may create inflation. Again, that's talking about the money supply for the country. It's talking about the availability of money and currency at a very large scale, and so it's still macro. And finally, D, an increase in labor costs, increasing the additional cost of reducing another bus. That's more firm level. You're talking about the manufacturer of buses, right? So this is going to be the best answer here. And previous tutor said, as we know, economics has two main branches, commonly known as macro and microeconomics. Macroeconomics study is a study which concerns the whole economy and studies the behavior of an overall economy. On the other side, micro study is concerned about the person or firm and studies the behavior of individuals and firms while deciding the allocation of resources. Common terminologies used in macroeconomics are unemployment, aggregate demand, government spending, and inflation. And common terminologies in micro include different types of costs, buyers, and sellers. Therefore, option D is the correct answer. Yes, agreed. Next question says, when economists say that the demand for a product has decreased, they mean that 1, the product has become scarcer. 2, consumers are willing to buy lower quantities of the product at each possible price. 3, the price of the product has increased due to which consumers are buying less quantities of this product. Or 4, the aggregate supply curve has shifted to the left. So when we talk about demand for product decreasing, we typically are referring to a leftward shift in demand. So it's going to look something like this. Right? So what we're saying is that at every single price level, the quantity demanded has gone down, right? For this constant price level at P, the quantity demanded has gone down by this much. Same for at this level and at this level, right? So which one of these answer choices best fits with that scenario? And it is answer choice 2, that consumers are willing to buy lower quantities of the product at each possible price. So let's take a look at the previous tutor's answer. And they said 2 as well. And they said the decrease in demand for a product means that the quantity demanded of the product at each possible price point has decreased. This causes a leftward shift in the demand curve. Consumers are willing to buy lower quantities of the product at each price. A decrease in demand is caused due to factors other than the price of the product, such as unfavorable changes in the tastes and preferences of the consumers, a decrease in income of the consumers, a decrease in the price of a substitute good, or an increase in the price of a complementary good. So yes, so anything that would cause this would be like a demand determinant changing, but yes. Okay, I'm gonna take a really quick break. I'm gonna get a little bit more water, but I'll be right back and we'll continue off of where we're leaving off here. Right, okay, so let's continue off with this next question. So production costs to an economist, A, consist of explicit costs only, B, reflect opportunity costs, C, consist of accounting costs only, or D, consist of total fixed costs and variable costs. And so for economists, we talked about both explicit and implicit costs, and implicit costs really refer to those opportunity costs of production. And so that's what we're looking at right here. Which one of these opportunity costs, which one of these answer choices reflects the opportunity cost? It's going to be B, that production costs to an economist reflect opportunity costs. So you can move on to the previous year's answer, and they also said B. They said opportunity cost is the total sacrifice made in terms of cost for producing at a given level of output. This is the cost of alternative opportunities sacrificed or given up. Thus, for an economist, the opportunity cost is a sum total of actual money expenditure on inputs purchased, explicit costs, and an estimated value of supplied inputs by the producer, i.e. implicit costs. Opportunity costs arise because resources are scarce and they have alternative uses. Next question says, a firm in perfect competition is a price taker because A, charging a lower price than the market price is considered uncompetitive. B, the market price is always the profit maximizing price. C, it is easier to take the price as given rather than calculate the profit maximizing price, or D, it produces a tiny proportion of the total output of a particular good and buyers are well informed about the prices of other firms. And so the correct answer here is going to be D. That in perfect competition, it is true that all firms produce only a small portion of the total number of goods, and also that we assume that there's going to be perfect information about prices. And what that means is that there's no ability of the firm to price set. It has no market power. It's too small. And if it prices higher, everybody else already knows exactly how much the good costs everywhere else. So they're just going to go to someone else to buy the good. And so the firm in perfect competition can only be a price taker and just take the market price as the price that they set. So D is the correct answer. The previous tutor says, in economics, markets are mainly divided into two types known as perfectly competitive and imperfectly competitive markets. The perfectly competitive market is that type of market where a large number of sellers selling identical goods to a large number of buyers. The perfectly competitive firms are known as price takers because they produce an insignificant amount of total production, and so they don't have enough power to affect the price set by the industry. Therefore, option D is the correct option, and that's a good answer. And I think that's all we have for today, so hopefully that was helpful for you guys. And other than that, I will see you guys again next week for some more micro macro questions.